So both of our artists have slideshows today, which is exciting. Just to give a bit of background to their work and the works that are in the show. Before we start, I'd like to acknowledge that we are still unceded Musqueam, Tsleil-Waututh, and Squamish territory, and we acknowledge that daily we acknowledge our presence as uninvited guests daily, and we're trying to adore. I was distracted by the selfies happening. Trying to adore, keep a presence in the structure of the gallery, haptically, physically. So you'll notice some sonic cues coming up in the next few months, and acknowledging the presence of our host nations and their work, especially in regards to land and water defense. So I'm pretty excited to be working with some artists on that. And to continue conversations as part of operating a space on Indigenous territory. I'd like to welcome our visiting artist, Pamila, who has been around all week. And hello, welcome. Comes to us from, if you want to mention your
Treaty 13 area, so that's Takaranto in Mohawk, and on the lands of the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, and Wendat, and many other members of Indigenous communities who flock to the Big Smoke, Toronto.
Thank you, Pamela. And Whess Harman.
I will introduce myself. So my name is Whess Harman. My pronouns are they and he, with a general preference for they, them. I am Curator, which is amalgamated under the Lake Valley Nation. So for those who don't know where that is, it's our neighbors are the Tahltan, Gitxsan, and Wet'suwet'en. Grew up mostly in Smithers. I am an artist, surprise. And I'm also the curator at Grant Gallery. Yeah.
And our locations and where we're speaking from, I wanted to, before we started, also have the artist mention this, because it is sort of the background of this exhibition and the conversations that we've been having across Zoom over years between Pamela and I, and over the past couple of years as well. And yeah, so I'll let the artists talk about their work, because they've got pretty significant 12 slideshows. The number kept getting higher and higher. Pamela wants to show us everything, which I love. I've been listening to her and hanging out with her all week, so you're in for a treat. And then we'll talk a bit more about the exhibition afterwards. Sure. Yeah. Thanks for coming.
Do you want to go first?
No.
Okay, I'm gonna go. Just kidding. Uh-oh. Oh, there you go. Oh, JK.
There you go.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I don't use Macs.
There's a no name right there. That's your.
Yeah, I have it open already.
Oh.
So. I'm just gonna open it again. Sorry about this. I have not presented in person for a while. Slideshow.
You can just go down here.
Thank you. Okay, cool. So again, that marker there is where my family's our village is, and the surrounding mountains and areas are territory. So pretty far north, but when people say like up north, I don't really know what they mean, because to me up north is the Yukon. But yeah, so the work for this exhibition, it's kind of a long series of iterations of things. You may have seen some of my other work known as Potlatch Punk, which is a series of, very dark. It's a series of jackets that I've been working on for the past 6-7 years, kind of as needed, I suppose. or as deadlines demand. And what it is working with, partially working with traditional materials, but also working with contemporary materials. The regalia from my nation is pretty varied. A lot of the materials we had to work with were often through trade items. So we did have form line, but not in the same way that is here or further to the coast. But yeah, these jackets, they kind of take the amount of time they take. Some of them I've spent 30 hours on, some of them over 100. They're all kind of inspired by different things. That first one was because I was in Banff and we were going to go see Hallucination in Calgary, and whenever I'm in Alberta, people tend to think I'm from there, and I just wanted something that represented where I was from. But since then, the jackets have kind of moved on into other things. This one is inspired by an essay by Mary Ebert, collected in a collection of essays called Making Space for Indigenous Feminisms. A lot of my work kind of comes out of reading, I think partially just because there's very limited kind of archives from my community. But they also come from pop culture. This pink jacket was one that I made kind of following some, the many years of continued conversations that happened with siblings. We both really love sci-fi, and part of, I think, making these jackets is out of a desperation to have fun. So I find them, they're never really totally complete. There's always the option to go back and edit them more. But as I was going on with them, so they initially started mostly as beading projects, but while we do bead in my community, I started looking more at our regalia. So this is a photo of, not exactly sure what the event was, but as you can see, we use a lot of ribbons, people use rickrack, the buttons don't have to be shell buttons. Some people use, one of my favorite ones I was telling Pamela about last night is this it's a bear that is completely made out of sequins. And the purpose of our regalia is very much to describe what clans we're a part of, and it's in terms of how it is linked to potlatching systems. It's kind of I don't want to get fully into the potlatch right now, but one of the things that I'm really interested in about potlatching culture for me is redistribution, and one of the ways that this happens through the potlatch is you can't mend your own regalia, you can't make your own regalia, you need to commission that, and that's just a way of involving the entire community. But yeah, this picture, again, I can't remember what the event was, but it's in Burns Lake, and these are a lot of our clan leaders. You can't see super well, but again, just sort of more examples of the usage of fringe and kind of this maximalist style that I really love. But I personally don't have any regalia, but what I do have is a, more of a relationship with my mom in kind of a colloquial way, and my aunts. And one of my favorite things about their style is they, when they're young, they were in their late 20s, early 30s, in the 90s and 80s, and this is a picture of my mom.
Wow.
So this was taken in Prince Rupert. That's probably me in the stroller in the back. But she, I don't remember why we were talking about it, but I was asking her about her personal style and what she was up to back then, and her style icon was Joan Jett. So you have a lot more of these denim and leather jackets and fringe and embellishment, and the hair. So a lot of what I've been working on is trying to blend those things together. But the last couple years of showing the jackets, it's this weird thing that happens in all art, but you start to make something and then someone's oh, can you make another version of this and another version of this? And without really, I think, always conceptualizing the labor that's involved with that. So I'm really involved with zine culture, which is very much about quick reproduction, and what I started doing with the jackets was scanning different parts of them and then recomposing the images. So this is actually again, not the best image, but this is the inside of that red jacket because it had just so much sewing on the inside, and like I don't love the outside because I hadn't done applique before, so like to me I'm like, oh, it looks messy. But what I did love is like when you open the jacket up and you run your hands over the back, you can feel all the stitches, and it's just really satisfying and another way to look at things. And the other thing about these jackets is when they're shown, they tend to be shown kind of suspended, and there's something kind of ghostly about them. They're static. They might sway a little on the fish line, but they don't really capture like what I think I'm thinking about in my dream fantasy of the usage of these jackets. I'm like, you know, the ultimate fantasy is they get used in performance, or they get used in community, and they have bodies, and then they're moving, and they're involved in a certain way. So as I started recomposing the images, they have started, that was kind of my way of adding movement to them. And this is a more recent work where I took those scans, printed them, and then re-sewed them on the back of these blankets. So moving a little bit closer towards like traditionally what we would use and use for display. And again, like this way I was able to kind of like compose the scans in a way that moved across a little more. And it was a nice test. And part of why, I think this is something I always wanted to do, but there's always this fear of stepping on toes, or, okay, my biggest fear was like my mom or my auntie seeing it and being like, you did this wrong, or that's disrespectful, or like, you have no right to do this, and those types of anxieties. But I finally just went ahead and did one. I showed it to my mom. She was just excited. I think she's, yeah, like, okay, my relationship with my mom's weird, but like she's excited, and I think she just is really happy to see someone engaging with our art style. So for this show, the jacket that those prints are based on is this one based on a Buffy St. Marie song. I should have just brought the jacket. I'm so sorry. I don't think the picture's in there.
Okay.
It's cool. Thank you, though. But it says, "Our blood runs the redder" on the back, which is not a direct lift from the lyrics of that Buffy St. Marie song, but a couple years ago it was, I don't know, International Aboriginal Day, or whichever we call it now. I so habitually call it that, but I know we've changed the name. But Buffy was performing on ABTN, and I was watching it with my mom, and it was so, like, I love the shots when they cut to the crowd and you would see like these big tough aunties just like sobbing and just having these like really beautiful moments together. And Buffy kind of like unites, I think, intergenerationally a lot of us, especially in place sometimes of more traditional offerings. So this is the front of the jacket. I will describe it to you. Basically, on the front of this jacket, there are these long scalps of horsehair that hang down the front of them, as well as some coyote teeth and bone beads and some seed beads as well.
Is that hair the same?
Yes, yeah. So the same kind of scalps that are on that one. These images are so hard to show. Every time I show them, it's always like mystery. But what you would be seeing is, again, like these kind of scanned in and then recomposed images of these jackets. So I did the front and the back of each of them, and then printed them onto fabric. And then these were actually made before that blanket. So this was kind of my first test of sort of wading into the water of like working with those aesthetics. And then as for the display of these, one of the things I'm thinking about a lot is we are a fishing village. The sockeye salmon is our main source of food. And the way that happens, so when you're hanging the salmon to dry, we're known for our dried fish especially. It's on these long poles, and we have the entire like housing infrastructure. specifically built for it, these smokehouses. So that's why I was trying to kind of evoke a little bit of that feeling with how we displayed it.
At Lake Bevy.
Yeah. We have it's another very long conversation, but there's been a archaeological team working up in Wootat for the last 10 years now already.
Wow.
But we have the smokehouses, and we have a little island called Smokehouse Island that is probably man-made, but we don't really understand or know how. For whatever reason, we've lost that knowledge. But this team has been digging through kind of samples of that island, and it's a place we've been using for many generations. So that is my quick run through of the process of how those particular pieces got to where they are. And I'm gonna end the show. I did it.
Do we really have 10 minutes? Okay. Do you want to switch spots?
Sure, yeah.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Thank you for coming. Thank you, Denise and Whess, and thank you for hosting me here this week. And I guess I am definitely a conversationalist and a relationship artist, and I have realized a lot this week as I unfolded different parts of my story. And Denise was witness to it and listening, and we'd be driving around, oh, why didn't I hear about this before? Why didn't I hear about that before? So I realized, I was like, yeah, this story's never done. It's always, there's so much, ongoing. It's ongoing, and that is basically me in a nutshell. I'm a work in progress. So I don't have my work in a PowerPoint the way Wes has just shown, but you're just gonna have to bear with me opening and closing files. Can I just take that? Yeah? Okay, unless you need to do that again.
No, I'm done.
So Denise and I started talking around 2016, 2017? Yeah. And so 2017, and the year prior, a curator in Toronto, who I've known for probably 20 years in my practice, Victoria McFawwood-Paul, is the co-director and curator at the A Space Gallery. In 2016, I was doing quite a bit of social practice and relational art, or socially engaged art, community engaged art, whatever you want to name it. But really, I think the more and more I look into history and who in Canada, in the mapping of feminist, intersectional feminist archivists and people who cite art history, feminist art history in Canada on Turtle Island, I realized that a large portion of artists are racialized, feminist, and queer trans folks who are in that sector, particularly that genre of the arts. And I have data, which I will not go into, but it's definitely, there's not any gender parity around that. And I think, the reckoning that we've been going through in the last little while since post George Floyd, but even prior to that with Truth and Reconciliation, we're just starting to have this conversation. So I do want to preface that by saying, back to 2016, Vicky invites me to do a project, but the band I was in, I say that as a musical riff, we broke up. It was I was a teacher facilitator for an after-school girls group that became a contemporary art project for me. And we took Toronto by storm, and I was trying to use that as my premise or my thesis for MEd at OISE, but I didn't get in. And then once we started getting press, OISE says to me, come back and reapply, and I said, absolutely not. Because I really love rejection and failure. It teaches me a lot in life, and I just was like, I'm already an alternative high school teacher. I'm constantly jamming with my students, and I don't need you. You need me more than I need you. And then that was the end of the discussion. So I have to give you a couple of markers. I get invited to do this solo project or a group project, I don't know, because now I don't have a collective anymore, called Boner Kill. Boner Kill was a youth, basically, contemporary art project that I facilitated and led, artist-led, but then in my day job, I am a high school art teacher. So I don't say I'm either or, I tend to say I'm just an artist. I am an artist, I teach full-time in high school, or I take breaks when I need to, depending on the projects I'm working at. I had this long fascination with trying to disrupt pretty much, modernist views, or like re-engage ideas around modernism, where what I would say the hegemonic status quo would often take from the non-Western world. So I was looking at Eames, you might know Charles and Ray Eames, and they have a project called House of Cards, and I was trying to mimic this freestanding sculpture. Sorry, oh my gosh, the resolution's awful. But this is a very small
Sorry,
image.
Our regular projector broke.
No
so
problem. Don't worry. Sorry, bear with me. But you can look it up too. There's a whole wiki page, I'm sure. Tons of Eames resources online. But this is a project called House of Cards that was redone by, I don't know, some sort of marketing or advertising people. And I love the size of these. And I wanted to reimagine the House of Cards in a modernist, like going in and kind of doing a citation to what the Eames couple thought, because I think the tagline is like, beauty from their eyes or something around the modernism and whatnot, because of course they were the experts around modernism. I say that facetiously. And then I wanted to, I'm constantly with kids, like other people's children, all day and night. And, so I was like, how can I push this idea of social practice further for, that I am a teaching artist in a high school classroom every day. So I have that power I don't need to invite artists in, I'm there, right? I'm a practitioner on the outside of the school, and I'm a practitioner inside. I don't necessarily, but teenagers are very fickle in the sense that I could be, Elvis Presley, and they wouldn't give a hoot because I'm just their art teacher. What do you mean you're an artist? So even before coming to the show, I was telling Denise this week, they're like, so what are you gonna wear in Vancouver for the big night? And I was like, it's not a rock concert, guys. Like, I just wear things that are comfortable. And these are some of the dialogue, that I have with them day in, day out. And they're like, who's gonna pick you up? I'm like, Uber X styling is not coming into the Vancouver International Airport. I'm getting picked up by my friend. Oh, well, why wouldn't they pay for that? Like, because of course they're also challenging me around, why am I telling them to go to art school? They have not drank the Kool-Aid. This generation is very, very smart. And also they have parents who are like, absolutely not. Not like our parents. It was like, you're out at 18 and you're like, okay, yeah, I'm going to go find myself. Meanwhile, these people are like, I hate you. Mom, Dad, can I have $20? Right? So it's like, I hear everybody's story. I hear the children's stories, and then I hear the parents' stories. So I'm always like, Switzerland, and where I have to kind of maintain boundaries around that piece and professionalism. But also, I am, in the Education Act in Ontario, teachers are in locus parentis, meaning we're like foster parents. But teachers don't like to have that conversation, right? Because we are education workers. So, this idea of social practice, doing it together, I've been long kind of examining this in my practice, I would say, since I was a youth. And back to the Eames, I couldn't necessarily find a curator. They would always say, oh yeah, they use language, it's sexy. And I'm like, it's sexy because I'm investigating Eames, or doing an inquiry on why they stole from non-Western ideas, right? But I didn't necessarily want to go down those tropes. So I'm giving you the background of how I got here. So I couldn't, and this project actually, then I started to work on these collages that I was, nobody in Toronto really knew that I had a practice because I was, Pamela, you're everywhere. And it's like, where am I really? But I am. My labor is on board. I've sat on 5 boards in 12 years. I've been on hiring committees, equity committees, you name it, public programming committees for the ROM, the Harbourfront, the AGO. So my labor's been really extracted in Toronto for I'm going on year 28, since age 20. And you couldn't say that I had a solo show to date in 2016 when I was given the show. And by the time 2019 rolled around, we finally fixed a date. And the first thing I said to my curator, Vicky, who I call my art doula, because there was quite a pathway that I had to take, Whess, like those tears. I understand those tears that you go through, right? It's like the relationship making with your artwork is the hardest, right? So I was doing these collage works in. I applied to go into the plug-in residency. I think it's called. It's not Summer Institute. What's it called?
Yes, it's Summer Institute.
Yeah, it is Summer Institute. SI. Yeah. So I was in the summer of 2010, and Shahzad Dawood was the lead artist who came, and he had this like amazing idea, quote unquote, where he was literally writing the project on the plane over from London to Winnipeg. And we have our first meeting, and without naming names, one very prolific and celebrated artist in Winnipeg was like, absolutely not, and like they threw a tantrum and said, I'm not here to do your labor. Like right away on day one, our first meeting, I was like, is this what artist-led residencies are like, right? Like, or what's the problem here? So it's like, I just also was tired of this idea of a master artist, and then, whether you're using the atelier model or the lead model or whatever. Bonerkill came out of a urgency where I was also finding that my grade 12 grads were coming back from OCAD, Ryerson, Guelph, York, and saying, I want to quit in year 2 or 3. And these are all racialized young undergraduate students. And I was like, no, you can't do that. Because of course I know the time and energy I pour into these youth during the school year, and then helping them build vision and create and open up their creativity around thinking through that they can have a life as an artist. So I found that when I looked at that data when I was applying in 2012 to OISE, it's true, right? Like that's where the numbers are and the dropout rates are incredible. So I've been brought into Ryerson, U of T, York, to talk to undergraduate students who are in the second, third, fourth year phase to help reaffirm and validate their practices, because schools are losing racialized youth in undergraduate programs at an alarming rate, right? And also we're in a pandemic. Also we were in a recession where, the applications have shrunk across the country now. And any of you who teach post-secondary in any discipline, you know that, right? So we're all clamoring for the same numbers. And so Bonerkill, yes, it was an after-school girls group for them, but for me, it was like my lab, my experimentation, my praxis of theory and practice, and then putting it out there. And I literally threw them into the street in street festivals when I was invited to do stuff, and we would do social practice projects. And that was to give them a taste. And are you hungry? And I have a friend who teaches in advertising and design at OCAD, and he was like, the way he talks to his students, it's like, tell me how hungry you are to get to the field, right? Don't just sit back and lay back. Like, mommy and daddy are not going to come here with a job for you. The way they drive you in and try to come and fight with your professors, this is not happening. And I really thought about that. I go, Steve, I gotta up my mojo as a coach and a facilitator, right? Like I do that for my girls' basketball group. Why can't I do that for art students that I get? So then I really thought long and hard around that, and I started to investigate, well, why would I want to go to Banff? Why would the thing is that what the field doesn't really understand is that it's not a level playing field. And I say this because teaching at-risk students has taught me that at-risk students become at-risk adults who go into whatever discipline. So by hook or by crook, they finish the program or not. But how is it that it took me 25 years to get a solo, and everybody says that I'm everywhere in Toronto? Tell me that. So there's a systemic flaw that I proved in that show at A-Space. and I'll show you how I got there. So these wonderful collages, Richard Vaughan owns this, and he recently died, unfortunately, but they're all, like, they're collectible, and I've made them into digital prints. People would buy them, but I still couldn't, so I have a market, but I still couldn't get a show. Why? Right? And it's like, I can't be on another board after 5 in my own city, in my own hometown. I can't do this anymore, people. So I started to talk back in a very polite and enduring way, where I would ask people in arts administration roles or curatorial and programming roles, hey, you guys want to be curators now at artist-run centers, where before it was a programming coordinator, and then it became programming director, and now it's curator, right? So everyone went and got professionalized. They're going to Bard and Yale and yada, yada, yada. Great, but why don't you see the systemic flaws for the exhibiting artist? You guys are cleaning up your act administratively and curatorially and programming, but you're not really doing anything to further the dialogue for the exhibiting artists. Agree or disagree?
Agree.
Okay, yeah. So that was my premise for starting this investigation. Then when I got over my tears, and my art doula is like, all right, Pamela, you can sit here and complain, or you can take the anger and do something. And I was like, yes, Audre Lorde, uses of anger. I have to read that again. You're right, Vicky. So I was like, read that with me. So we would sit and read things, and she was like, okay. And then we talk about healing and wellness and all these things that I was just like, would turn my nose up to. And I was like, wait a second, these are our gifts. Yoga's our gift. Ayurveda's my gift. Why am I not using this for my own healing, right? So there comes a time when I start to realize that, I have all this materiality that I've never used in 25 years at home. And I look into this dusty area of my studio room, and I find these 2 tapes that I collected. So we're talking 2018 now. And 15 years prior, that would have been 2003, I found these tapes. And they came from the AGO Library and Archives, and they were thrown out of the library and archives, and I found them in the garbage. And I had them for 13 years. In my possession, I never opened them, I never transferred them. Because, of course, what do you do when you don't have a show to show anything? You just keep collecting shit. And that's what I have, a large, my own kind of like mind archive or library of, I call it my library of subjectivity, where I have collected dead material that is not like, slide projector. I saw a live one show, and it was so heartwarming to see slide projectors and, film projectors. It was like, oh, okay, I can still do this. This is great. So here are these tapes.
I also call it like self-citation too, like and citation, and
yes,
because these are, what informs your work, and
yes,
so it's
absolutely
put through objects.
So I dust these tapes off, and you can see, I'm like, okay, maybe I can see what's on these tapes now. Finally, that I have a show. I tell Vicky, I've got these tapes, and she's like, and she gave me a lot of room in the beginning. It's like that. What do they call that? Like the parenting styles, So it was like at a distance. She's watching me play in the playground, and I'd be like, is this okay? Is that okay? And she's like, Pamela, you know what you're doing. Just go, trust yourself. And I was like, okay, art doula, I'll do this. Just, tell me when to breathe. So Identity in a Foreign Place, October 1st, 1993. Readings by Gino Chileno, Lakshmi Gill, who's still alive and well in BC, Zafar Sen Osak, and Antonia Mazza. And then the second tape is M.G. Vasanji, which you might know him, reading by Judith Osborne, Zafar Sen-Osak, and Mary Lou Mallet. So this is like a 2-day literary symposium that happened at the AGO in October 1st and 2nd, 1993. But the title was like very strange, and that's why I picked up these tapes from this refuse place called Arts Junction. And the AGO sends all their overage, what do they call that, overage? Like when you make too much of something? remainders, right? So posters, postcards, bookmarks, you name it. And then this whole box of like dead material was in it. What I mean is like media, and I was like media text, and I was like, what is this? So I picked these 2 tapes up, and I'm like, one day I'll see what's on them, because of course nobody has high video cameras anymore, or they're not using them. They've sold them mostly. And then on the spine of these were master and original, Identity and Foreign Place tape 1, master and original, if you see that. So they threw out the masters, right? They threw out the masters. And then there's tape 2, master and original. I then, before I show you that card, I transferred these tapes and I watched them, and I hear Lakshmi Gill, and she's telling her story in 1993, sitting there about 30 years prior, coming to Canada. She dropped out of her PhD program, it looks like, and she was here in BC. She comes to BC. She meets all these young people who she pulls up Rum Magazine and Angkor and Asianadian, and I'm like, oh, these are things I've seen. These are things that are in my collection. Holy smokes. And you can hear the tone of her voice. So I took that first 7 minutes of her presentation, and I created a video a video essay called Stuck Between an Archive and an Aesthetic. And it really did well for me in the sense that I just had no clue, because I knew that Toronto is such a fickle town curatorially, and they wouldn't believe me that I found these tapes and did this with this. But what I found is that I went to the AGO Library and Archives. Prior to that, it was July of 2018. Prior to that, I went to the Berlin Biennial, and I was blown away. Denise was doing a exhibition. She was on a team with Savvy Contemporary, and then also working at HKW, right? And we met up there. We introduced some other Canadian folks who were coming through. But it was the first biennial in Berlin Biennial's history that was co-curated by 4 Black diasporic curators of African descent from different continents. And it was phenomenal. And there was like so many POC, racialized folks, indigenous folks, and Black folks in Berlin. And Berliners were saying things like, there's never been this many like people of color in the city at one time, anytime. And I was like, to me, I'm like, oh, this is normal. This feels like a night at this, Studio Museum in Harlem or MoMA or something. And they were like, no, this is just not, this doesn't happen. And I was like, okay, well, why is that so different? Like, why is this so new to you, kind of thing? But they were very excited. I think Berliners were very excited too to see this type of curatorial change that was coming, or curatorial turn that was coming into Berlin. And Gabby, yes, was the lead curator, and she was the one to share the platform. So I recognized right away, I was like, oh, okay, she's sharing platforms. People do this internationally too, globally too. So I'm not doing the wrong thing, because people will tell me, they'll pull me inside, you already teach full time. Why are you working with youth? And I'm like, because I endearingly love them. Like, why would you say that, right? Like, what do you want me to do? Mushroom foraging with like white middle class, ladies who lunch? Like, this is not going to work for me. Truffles, yeah. So then I come back, and I'm like, okay, I got to watch that video again. So I watch the video, and I get it converted. I find some guy in like Scarborough, which is like Burnaby, or sorry,
it's a suburb.
Yeah, suburb of Toronto. And he converts it, sends me back the video file. I watch her over and over and over again until my tears just started to flow. And I don't think my partner said, I don't think I've seen you cry in like 20 years. And I was like, yeah, I think I gotta just cry this out, right? Because I just really connected with her story that, she comes from the Philippines, and she's Filipino and Punjabi descent. So Lakshmi Gill, I guess, is a Punjabi clan surname, and Lakshmi also is Indian, but I recognize that. But when you look at her, she looks mixed descent. And her narrative around quitting the PhD, coming here, teaching ESL. I've also read stories, like she also is the co-founder of the Canadian Poets League. Again, like that's somewhere buried too, that I found out. And then I realized, okay, this is the person I have to form a relationship with. And I didn't contact her. People went, what, did you contact her? I'm like, no, I'm just gonna use this tape and make something of it. And from there, I found out that I went to the library and archives. Amy Furness is the head librarian and archivist, and I'm like, what happened on October 1st and then 2nd and 3rd of 1993? And then the archivist looks it up. She's like, looks like we have an event that did happen. Yes, you're right. She goes to the 1993 file, pulls out this card and says, looks like there was a literary program. I'm like, yeah, what was it called? Identity in a Foreign Place. And she's like, here's the card. So this is a copy that they gave me. And I said, okay, well, was there any documentation? I just kind of wanted to play like a little bit of cat and mouse first. And then she said, yeah, let me look. And she's like, it looks like there are no sound recordings, but there are pictures. Would you like to see the pictures of the event? And I said, no. And then she says, wait a second, this is a analogous program. Prior to when, we're talking like Judith Mastai's time, right? So it was like before public programming was a thing. Like the way that, in those days it was a bit different, right? And, but not really. Like, you know, but this is called a public program there. Where now there are public programming positions, right? And departments and whatnot. So we find out that this is actually a parallel auxiliary, they call it an auxiliary event, a program.
At the Art Gallery of Ontario.
At the Art Gallery of Ontario for a show called Perspectives 93 with a artist of Filipino descent, Lanny Maestro, and the other artist is Micah Alexier, who's originally from Winnipeg. He's Jewish descent, and I don't know if he's out to the art world at the time, but I think there's some gay content in his work. And apparently this show was about identity, place, and cultural representation. And now, you know, let's take a snapshot of the time. It's like 1993, the Whitney Biennial is happening. That was a shitstorm in New York City. What I mean by that, it was the first time that they saw artists of color and queer artists. We didn't have the terminology of trans identities, but, you know, like there was a lot of difference in the upper echelons of the New York art world, and it really rocked New York, and we still talk about it in today, right? Like you might have studied it in your art history, contemporary art history programs and whatnot.
So is this the beginning of where you were starting your archival practice? And
yeah,
like this was
I was not an archivist before this show, and I don't claim to be. But I do like decentering them. I do like counter-archiving. I do like counter-hegemonic programming. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. But you also saw the need for, because our institutions that were supposed to be archiving
yes.
these contributions, like Lakshmi Guilds,
yeah.
were not doing that. Or I remember the show. I saw the show at A Space, and you had the article like blown up of a reviewer who reviewed Lanny Maestro's
yes. That was John Bentley Mays, who died. And so we find out that this literary symposium is for the show Perspectives. It's apparently about identity, representation, and difference. But there's 4 articles that come out, art reviews that come out, and one happens to be, they're all white reviewers, all cisgender, maybe 2 women and 2 men. And one of the men happened to be John Bentley Mays. If anybody is old enough to remember John Bentley Mays, you know that he made or broke your career in one article, in one review. And that's what he attempted to do to Lanny Maestro. He says that she's whining about her Filipino traumatic history, but yet he calls like a Micah Alexier, a modern day Caravaggio and modern day Rembrandt. I'm like, if you know anything about Micah's work, it's like he basically riffs off of illustrations that he finds, and then he blows them up, or he does his 1-minute scribble and whatnot. And it was not a dig at him, right? The people keep asking me, like, why are you attacking the AGO? Why are you attacking Micah? I'm like, I'm not. I am going for the jugular of the art system.
Yeah, you're seeing through like the archiving practices.
Yes.
disposal,
Yeah.
decisions around disposal,
So
and
then,
the critical writing, like kind of a perspective that's dominating
Yeah,
in the art world.
totally,
And
right?
countering that with the work. That
And
you're
if you guys,
developing.
do we have time? Can I show that? or
We don't have a lot of time.
No? Okay. Okay, so let me just
Yeah.
quickly finish with this,
Yeah.
and then I'll move towards the newspapers that are here, how I got there.
That's
So then, the next turning point for me happens to be when in November, so that's the summer, right? I figure out the video and what I do. There I'm looking at Lakshmi Gill's contribution in this literary symposium, and then I moved to the birth of multicultural TV, because I asked myself, all right, if I wasn't in a museum, or if I was not, my people were not at all represented in cultural programming, public programming, or we're just for the multicultural heroes and holidays, or samosa day in the cafeteria today, or whatever you want to call it, or Jamaican patty day, because that's what we do in education. And the art world does its own version of that, right? So that's what I did, is I made a snapshot of 1993, or the early 90s time, and the one significant event that happened in 1992, which led to the work I'm doing now, is a uprising when two plainclothes officers shot a young black man, Raymond Lawrence, in Peel region. And the Black Action Defense Committee, which has a long history in Toronto for activism and also taking state-funded institutions to task, they organized a protest, a civil protest. Everything went fine. I was present there. But by the end of the protest, the youth that came were very upset, and they dispersed, and there was an uprising, right? Civil protest. And there was a lot of unruly behavior, and folks wanted to shut it down. Now, the thing to note is that in the same week, the Rodney King verdict came out. Does anybody remember the Yonge Street uprising, or it was called a riot? So if you look it up, there's a wiki page on that too, right? And what happened, the premier of the day, Bob Ray, was like very distraught around the violence that ensued and whatnot. So what I am doing now is I'm actually looking at the fact that state-funded institutions really don't know how to still deal with racialized youth and whatnot, and youth culture, and it's very dear to me because I came out of this program that was funded post 1992 Yonge Street Uprising, so I want to pay it forward for the youth I work with. I'm no Larry Clark, and I've just got this fixation on youth culture or anything. It's more like, and Larry Clark does his thing too, but or an aging hipster or anything like that. It's more like I want to make sure that I have, I can, when my day comes and the universe is like, okay, it's time for you to go, I know that I've done my work around paying it forward, and I know that I've done my work around bringing and lifting, right? So the thing is like, I can still get angry, or I can lift. I can use that time and energy and placement to lift when I get an opportunity. So by November of 2018, the Canadian Sikh folks, members of the Canadian Sikh community, are put on a federal watch list. And my friend texts me and says, hey, did you hear the news today, the national news? And I said, no, I didn't. And she sends me this article that we're put on the watch list again. Now the thing is that, I don't know if every white person gets put on a federal watch list when a white person commits a crime or murders someone or blows something up or whatnot. But for some reason, we tend to get dragged in, and that's a lot to do with the leadership in India, who just keeps telling Canada, oh my gosh, you're harboring terrorists, do something about this. So I quickly decide to get up and do a Google search around Canadian Sikhs, in particularly photography. I'm like, I want to know what comes up. But then I move off of Google and I decide to go to eBay. And I find these 4 images. And the title of the post of the buy is called Terrorists and Murderers. So I have these 2 windblown pictures. And this is a Canadian press photographer who's putting his archive online on eBay. So these two white men who are murderers apparently, and then these 2 men who the photographer has listed here as Inderjeet Singh Ryat, the Canadian Sikh activist, December 1985, staff photograph, and this fellow named Talvinder Singh Parmar, Canadian Sikh activist, Canadian Press Photo, 1285. I quickly purchased these 4 images from this person who lives here in BC, I think from the Nelson area, and I contact him and say, what else you got? Do you have more photographs? What do you have? And I go, this is what I'm looking for. I'm like, do you have anything around Sikhs in Canadian Sikhs in BC in 1900s or anything like that? He goes, I have something. Let me get it to you. I said, okay. And he sends me these 3 JPEGs of these 3 papers. Now, I did not find these in an archive. I found them on eBay from the same seller that sold me these photos of these 2 terrorists. They are terrorists. You know, if anybody followed the Air India bombing, Flight 185, Sturla Gunnarsson has done a wonderful documentary. He lives here in BC, in Vancouver. He's done a wonderful documentary about the Flight 185, and it's with, there's a lot of the family members of the deceased. And you know, the Canadian government didn't even realize that. They just kept saying it's India's problem because it's an Air India plane, but they didn't realize that like some 300 people were Canadian on the plane. So they kept trying to pass it to India, but it was a terrorist act here. You know, that the Nelson, apparently the bombs were made somewhere near Duncan, right? But if you haven't looked at the Air India 1985 incident, it's a big part of our history. CSIS was also like really effed up like the whole situation. I think they didn't really come to task. These 2 were not brought to fully onto task. And there is a monument. I asked your father on the weekend if there's anything that represents the Air India bombing, and he quickly was like, are you kidding? What? No. And I was like, but we have something in Toronto for it, in the Humber Bay Escarpment down by the waters. There is a monument for the Air India Flight 185 victims. It's a beautiful stone monument. So that's basically how I then started to realize that this project is not finished. This is actually just starting for me. I will do the House of Cards version when now I think I have a little bit more leverage with talking to institutions. That show, Denise, even though Denise and I were, I would say, I can't count Denise's contribution to what's happening now. It is a significant show for me, being in BC finally, but I got, I think, 12 shows after the A-Space show. I also got invited to about 15. What was the date of the A-Space show again? March 21st to April 20th of 2019.
And just because probably most people here haven't seen this show, so it was like all of your archival work.
Yes. So the video that was playing, that's indexed sum of all parts, and because we were trying to figure out if I was coming or not coming, pandemic, will the flight be canceled, I decided to take the installation and turn it into a video animation, which you're watching. So that's 75 works. Some of them are front and back, so there's 83 images, and I still have about 10 more to include. And then I won the Contact Festival of Photography's Ed Bertinsky photo book award, so I'm making a photo book out of it, a video install, and then a video animation, and then the actual animation, and that'll be at the Peel Art Museum and Archives, and it'll be a feature Contact show in 2023. So the book launch and the actual installation in its entirety. But I still feel that it's sum of all parts, it's not the whole thing. And Index also is not necessarily like, it's a self-awareness project, but it's also, it's showing curators that, you know, you just don't have a straight and narrow approach to members of different communities who do not fit the standards of art history and the art canon, right? And anyone, you know, I started to purposely collect books by global South Asian artists, because I'm so tired of, you know, a professor friend who says, I need you to meet like Amrit because she needs to like connect with you. I'm like, why? Why can't you? You're the professor, right? Well, you can school her about what though? Like the art world's huge. Like, what am I schooling this person on, right?
I'm just gonna open it up to questions, just because
please.
10 to 15, and we're almost done.
Yeah, I can. Thank you.
But yeah, so what we were getting to, I guess, is the Nelson Daily prints that you added to this iteration of Index.
Yes.
Through conversations
1909, 1914, and 1947.
Yeah.
So those are very significant dates. And the way we are, right, because of course after first contact and the usage of the term Indian, that was for the indigenous communities. Right. I'm talking from the perspective of the settler. But, if you're writing press, right, or writing a story, are you calling us Indians too? Like, you're going to confuse the public. So we're considered here Hindus with double O. Prior to partition in 1947, when Britain separated India and Pakistan, we were called British India. Prior to British India, we were called Hindustan. But, some people, I have friends who absolutely refuse using the terminology of South Asia or Middle East. What does that mean, right? You become like gray area then. So we're trying to reclaim things like Swana and using I have aunts and uncles who will refuse to call India even, they call it Hindustan. They go back to prior to British India. So language is so important, right, to a lot of us that way, around that piece, and also reclaiming the phonetic spelling of our cities and our villages and whatnot. So changing the way the British spelled things, Mumbai, Bombay,
And thank you very much for
yeah,
that.
no problem. I told you it was going to be.
So just to give a bit of background, Whess and Pamela and I were talking about, having these very long Zoom conversations about solidarities too, with early diasporas and settlers coming from, pre-partition.
I'm just going to show you, this is an interior shot of A-Space.
Oh,
so this
thanks
is what
for
I
bringing
did.
that up.
Yeah, so there's Index on the back wall in its entirety at the time. And now you're seeing the video iteration.
And thank you for bringing that.
Yeah, it's so hard to describe it and not use the video. Thank you.
So Pamela had mentioned Boner Kill, and that was how I first got to know about her practice and sort of this work with youth, and that interested me, that it was intersectional and intergenerational, and then that's how we started to talk, and then just very loosely I was getting to know Wess's practice when I came back here to our gallery, and was really interested in the community building aspect, and the interest in zine and sort of just circulating work and ideas, and this emphasis on not interrupting space, but creating these spaces where maybe, whether in the gallery or the contemporary art space or fair, or even music venues, where you are kind of almost citing yourself and kind of inserting yourself into the ways that those places have been thought of or represented, whether it's, again, the archive. Wess's work is very archival in terms of clothing and body and places like that. And when you describe going into a music venue and sort of wearing work or not work, but beading and identifying yourself not through conventional regalia, but kind of intervening in that space in a way, and how both of you have done that. And in our conversations, we talk about solidarities and everything, and and it took a long time to get to these works. In fact, they showed up the week of the install. I actually wrote the pamphlet before I'd seen fully the works.
Very graciously.
Yeah.
I have a question
Oh, yes.
for Whess.
Yeah.
Yeah. So just I have a question about your jackets, and specifically when you're talking about how part of the potlatch is redistribution, and that redistribution happens via you commissioning somebody else to make a regalia for you, and then you're making these jackets. You haven't gotten like regalia, like say like made by somebody, so you're making these jackets. I'm curious about the relationship between you making and wearing these jackets, and the regalia of your community.
The funny thing is, I think like initially that first jacket I made, the potlatch punk one, I did wear for a while, but most of them I don't actually wear them because they do feel a little bit too much. They're a little too much. Like they draw a lot of attention, and I think over like the last couple, like I can't envision a space personally where I would feel especially comfortable wearing them, particularly in the city. Like there's a little bit about them that kind of makes you feel like a target, which is funny because like I initially made them to wear more, to shows that I went to. Like pre-pandemic, I was at shows like once or twice a week, but yeah, they've really kind of like become something else. And one of the things that I've been struggling with is like there was a period until I kind of flat out put on my site like these are not for sale. There's something about this like fashion element to them. Someone asked if I'd be interested in showing them at the Indigenous Fashion Week, and I was like, that's not really what they're for. Wow. And like these questions come with I think the best of intentions, but for me they're about consumption, and like, well, what I would really prefer is that they inspire someone to make their own thing. And like I do have jackets that are like pretty covered in patches that I do wear more casually, but those are patches that like I've bought from friends or have been made by friends or have been gifted to me, whereas the jackets that I make really have become art objects. And like now my struggle is like, what do I do with these art objects? And especially them as commodities, because like something that I feel like I'm contending with a lot is this it's the reality of the potlatch ban having gone on for so long, is like we lost so many decades of what could have been innovation in our own practices. Yes. So now it becomes like, okay, I don't want them in museums, I don't want them to be sold to just like random people. Because my feeling is a little bit like, haven't you kind of like taken enough? But at the same time, my community is not set up to take care of items like this as well. So, right. Yeah, I don't know if that answers.
It does.
Okay.
Can you talk a little bit about your patches?
Yeah, the Indian famous and Indian curse.
Yeah.
Yeah. As you were talking about like the use of the word Indian and like how it becomes confusing. Like I grew up in Prince Rupert, which has a really large, what we would call East Indian community, as well as in Prince George as well. And when you go back home, that is still the terminology that a lot of people use.
East Indian?
East Indian, yeah. Like there's no distinction made whether someone is Sikh or Hindu. It's just like that is an East Indian person. And like,
we don't use that term anymore.
Yeah, right? And like...
What's that?
We don't use that term.
Yeah, because it comes from the British East India Company.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And then we don't use the term Indian anymore either.
Yeah,
it's like,
I know. I get afraid sometimes. Like, can I say that I'm an Indian without offending someone? Right?
Yeah. And it's like, but the patches I made, I think because I was just like getting frustrated. And like with the Indian famous patches, so like you can be really well known within the Indigenous arts community, but not outside of it. Yeah. So like I have lots of friends who I consider like superstars, and like I'm always, just constantly in awe of them. But we're also kind of dealing with institutions and like what we are and aren't able to do and what we are and aren't solicited for. So reclaiming, I don't know if like we can call Indian a slur. Like I think if like a non-Indigenous person calls me that, I'm like, don't you dare. But within our own community, we use it, and we use like now the NDN abbreviation, which I thought about using as well. But there's just something kind of like shouty backy about being like, no, I'm Indian famous. And then the Indian cursed one was, I feel like that's like the flip side of being Indian famous is you're kind of cursed to only be able to thrive and like innovate within that label.
Yeah.
But yeah.
And can you talk a bit about the work you do as well? Because you're just mentioning these artists that aren't known outside of, sort of Indigenous communities or even smaller communities within that, artistic communities, how you're bringing them into spaces. And because even now at Open Space, you've created within your own, so Whess also has a solo exhibition at Open Space until April 30th, but you're even creating a kind of space within that show for other artists, and you've also often done this through projects.
Yeah, I'm not against the solo show or anything, but I really, like, so much of my art career has come up through being a part of group shows where I have been able to participate with artists who are like a little further along in their career. And there's something about that energy of being able to be brought together that is really important to me as an artist. Having now done a solo show, I'm like, there is also something really beautiful about like having a big space to kind of navigate and figure out. But nonetheless, I still wanted to be able to bring in other artists who I really respect, because they are such a huge part of shaping who I am, what opportunities I have, and also are incredible in their own right and like inspire and like push me to try and think about different ways to engage with my own artwork. So it's not published yet. I'm still designing it, but there is a zine that goes along with the exhibition at Open Space that was my form of commissioning out work. So it's people who are writers, it's artists, and not all of them are Indigenous, but like they're people from the community here who I feel like have made it possible for me to be here. And then other kind of elements of the show. There's one blanket that I made. My friend Cole Pauls designed the back patch for it. Initially we were going to do a jacket, and then I couldn't find, it's like the silliest thing, I couldn't find a denim jacket that was like dark enough, that was like secondhand, and we want like a pitch black jacket. We just got very fixated on it. It's like, well, okay, I can get mountain wool a lot easier that way. So we did a blanket instead. And then I also did a video performance, which I hadn't done before, and then commissioned Chandra Melting Tallow to do the music for. So just pulling different elements of like how you would organize a potlatch and applying that to an exhibition, because full disclosure, Canada Arts Council gave me 60 grand, which is more money than I've ever been handed. And I was like, I don't need all of this the way some artists need it. Like I'd rather redistribute and divest from state funding. So, yeah.
Thank you both for your talk. I wanted to ask, kind of in a similar vein, about medium and how both of you were thinking about your work as kind of works that have been shown before in a different way, and how this new way of showing the work. So for you, like these jackets as banners, and then for Pamela, this like archive now as a video, how that shift or like change in medium is important to you as an artist, but also like what maybe it does and how you think it maybe reads differently.
Yes.
Okay.
You were very unsure about the banners.
So the banners, like in my mind initially, they were kind of like test pieces, and I feel like it's generous to say I come from a printmaking background, but in my undergrad I spent a lot of time doing printmaking, and I've been trying to think of like, it's just dealing with this kind of push and pull that I feel like I have with institutions. It's like you're very high in demand, but sometimes I feel like I don't have enough content to give out. So I'm like, okay, how can I do repetition? And then like there's something about the copy as well that feels in certain ways inauthentic, but I'm like, but no, a lot of labor goes into this and a lot of labor is put into reproducing. And I have, I feel like I'm still unsure about them. Like I'm much happier seeing them now in a space. I'm like, no, they're art. Like they're art. But I think there's I have a lot of fear about engaging with certain cultural practices from my home as someone who's trans and queer from a community that has been really heavily affected by the Catholic Church. So a lot of the work that I make is very much like, okay, what fragments am I holding? How can I compose them into a new work? And then how do I get over this feeling of inauthenticity? And how do I, get over the fear of having an auntie yell at me.
And you were really interested in even with your jackets, the way they were displayed in earlier exhibitions. A body was sort of inferred, and you were talking earlier about the other banner with movement, kind of. And these are they're very still. I'm wondering if that's something that you're still questioning or unsure about.
Yeah, a little bit. Like I'm a little happier with these, and I think it's just like that this looks more like it was intended for a gallery. Whereas, like I'm not a performance artist. I'm just so shy sometimes, most of the time. And like I had this ambition with the show at Open Space to make some video works that was like engaging with the jackets and like having body within them. But I just haven't figured it out yet, and that's fine. I might figure it out eventually, or I might not, and that is okay. Because there's still, like, for me, there's still so much motion involved with these works. Like, I hand sewed those. There's a lot of navigating that I need to do with my body, and like a lot of fighting with my own body, just with like body pain. Yeah, I don't know. It's funny that they're static because I'm like, to me, when I'm working with them, I'm like constantly moving. So. And
I don't want to keep you stuck in these chairs too much long. Thanks for bearing this. It's been an interesting talk, and it was great to hear the background to both of your works. I wanted to mention just again because this is the first time we're seeing these newspapers that there's this thing with invisibility that we've talked about sort of in the larger institutional and colonial way, but even just how close we have to get and how we have to really look at Whess's work. And then also you have picked these newspapers specifically for certain articles in them, but you haven't highlighted or circled them or done something so that we can just zoom in on them. We have to sort of look for them, and in that search we can kind of get a sense of there's so many offending texts in here, and sort of making us look for it and kind of thinking about where we are and what the histories are and how different people have been written about, like diasporas versus who's allowed in the country and whatnot, like Kamagata Maru is referenced, and Gurjit Singh and then Simranpreet.
Simranpreet did a little intervention, and those two finds were when she was at SFU doing a residency. So they're sourced from the SFU library, so we printed them off as well. And there's a settler writing a poem, or is it a poem?
Okay, I mean, this is also...
Sorry, I know you asked me not to put you on the spot, but...
It's okay. I'm Simranpreet. I'm also an artist.
Simranpreet Anand, who's local too.
The newspapers just came from, like, as artists, we kind of share materials and think through similar things. And so I just sent them to Pamila, not knowing that they would be eventually part of this exhibition. But there are two newspapers, ones that are more like grody, that I can send Pamela just from my own artistic research. They're both very different in terms of why I found them interesting. So one has this poem, they're both from 1914, one has this poem about Gurjit Singh, who was the person that charted the Kamagata Maru. And it's just this like really racist poem about him, and kind of just being like, don't really know what I want to do with it, but I want to do something with it eventually. And then the second paper I found interesting because it's who I'm assuming is a white person just based on like who was allowed to write the Bank of Busan and how conservative the Bank of Busan was in 1914. Writing about, like in the editorial section, so like writing a letter to the editor saying, hey, why are we not giving these like Hindu, again, like the same term Hindu for like also Asians, immigrants, certain rights, and then positioning himself as also a settler on like indigenous land, which I found really interesting as like a white person writing this thing at this time in this publication, but kind of have now become a part of our communal artistic archives.
Yeah. I think we should just make it into a zine. Yeah.
But yes, I wanted to invite everyone to take a closer look at all of the works.
You can take away.
Take away, and maybe we'll move this into more
social
setting for more questions. Just because thanks again. One
I
more.
was just going to offer something up for the archive because it's interesting to include also those moments of resistance within the dominant. Because there were a group of Toronto artists, all women. John Denise was the Global Mail critic as well.
Yeah, that was the article that,
Yeah, so this group of women, some of whom are here now, Elizabeth Mackenzie, amongst others, took up an ad in the Global Mail.
Wow, I'd love to find that.
It's a fabulous thing because what it is, it's an ad
Okay.
seeking an art critic for the Global Mail.
Yeah. I mean, it was funny because all his fans, all his friends were like, I don't know who, it was either Louis Jacob or Chris Curry who was like, go see Pamela's show. And I was like, there was all of his like peers were coming and I was a little bit worried because I was like, oh my gosh, I'm going to have to answer to them. And I've been on the, like in the art community, yes, but also like I've worked in the gallery world and Professional Art Dealers Association, so I was like, I don't really want to deal with the elite because of this. And I'm just trying to shed light for curators, for them to understand. And as a give back, the AGO Library and Archives, what they did is I gave them a tape of these masters, a digital tape. They said, we have something for you. And I was like, what more do you have to offer me after this article? And they said that they had a 1995 recording of Monica Quinganyo as the moderator with Homi Baba and Jamili Hassan. And in that, Keith, I was telling you the story last weekend. The dancer, African-American dancer who is HIV positive, it's well known that he is, Bill T. Jones, made a show, and the critic Arlene Croche wrote a scathing review where she even says in the review, I do not want to see the show. And then the New Yorker, or one of the major players in journalism, they publish her, the publisher or the editor publishes it and says, it says straight there in the article that I don't want to review, I'm not going to go see the show, I'm not going to review the show. With Bill T. Jones, who's done this really bad job at this, talking about survivors. And it was like very interesting because it's early multidisciplinary, like interdisciplinary and multidisciplinary work where Bill T. Jones is talking to people who have either faced any sort of illness or trauma and getting their narratives and then turning it into this beautiful movement piece, a choreographed piece. And she was like shitting all over it. And Homi is retelling the story that it had just happened in the fall of 1994. This is early 1995. And he's like, the problem is that there is a standardization for reviewing. And anybody who does not look like cis white men, they don't fall under that rubric of what is good art. The reviewer just doesn't know how to review anybody who's not cis white male. And Homi says it, right? So it's this culture of refusal that takes place. I don't know how much art criticism has like changed around that, but I was actually afraid about who would review my work, and it was mostly women who came to me and said, can I get a walkthrough? And I know these people in Toronto, but I didn't even ask them, hey, do you want to come see my show? I figured, you know, somebody somewhere will tell so-and-so, and Gabby Moser came to me and said, why didn't you ask me for a walkthrough? Everybody in this town asked me for a walkthrough. You didn't ask me for a walkthrough, Pamela. And I was like, because I thought I'm not supposed to talk to writers directly. I thought they're supposed to approach the gallery. And she was like, okay, you know, this is how it happens on the street kind of thing. And I was like, I was getting schooled because I was like, I don't want to break the protocol. If you're a friend and you're a writer, I'm not going to ask you to come look at the show and review it purposely. So I had some politics to kind of work through myself, like around that piece. But thank you for sharing that. I'm going to tell Gabby to look for that article, right?
It's gotta be in the Globe.
I have to check the Globe Archive. I'd love to see it and reprint it. Yeah. Thank you, Denise. Thank you so much for this opportunity. And thank you for coming, everybody. Because I am Wes's fangirl, I brought Wes's catalog. Oh, sorry, this is art. What do you call it? Art book? Art catalog? No, not catalog. Both.
Art
Okay.
book, sure.
Yeah, monograph. And you can see really lovely reproductions of the images from the installations of the Potlatch Punk. So if you want to come and look at this, I have it here. Yeah. Thank you. Stay for a drink.